Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Another day, more uncertainty. The focus shifted to Brussels and the EU summit. David Cameron arrived to state we're leaving the EU but not turning our backs on Europe. In the European Parliament, Nigel Farage was jeered but told MEPs, "You're not laughing now." And a Scottish MEP was cheered as he begged his European colleagues not to let Scotland down. It may have been politics on the surface, but underneath there's a sense of anger after the biggest single shock to the European political system since the fall of the Berlin Wall. Here's our political editor, Gary Gibbon.
You know when people are commiserating. Pats on the back, shakes of the head. A hug from the Italian Prime Minister Matteo Renzi. Tonight, David Cameron is telling the other 27 leaders where it went wrong and how he hopes Britain can have the closest possible relationship with the club it's leaving after 43 years.
Well, good afternoon. I'll be explaining that Britain will be leaving the European Union, but I want that process to be as constructive as possible, and I hope the outcome can be as constructive as possible, because, of course, while we're leaving the European Union, we mustn't be turning our backs on Europe. These countries are our neighbours, our friends, our allies, our partners, and I very much hope we'll seek the closest possible relationship in terms of trade and cooperation and security, because that is good for us and that is good for them. And that's the spirit in which the discussions, I think, will be held today.
It'll be his successor that moves Article 50 of the treaties, which means formally applying to leave the EU. Some leaders said the Brexit vote was already destroying the UK.
While the UK is in disarray politically, financially, economically and constitutionally, it would be out of the question to demand that they enact Article 50 straight away.
I think that mentally, psychologically, Brexit already is in place because of vote and because it was proposed in the first place, because of ambitions of few politicians, and country became a hostage of these ambitions.
David Cameron joined the others for his last summit photo. But soon 27 will be on one side of a table negotiating with Britain alone on the other. Hard bargaining will start. Chancellor Merkel said there could be no cherry-picking of EU laws, taking free trade, for instance, and dropping free movement. Their biggest fear is contagion, others following Britain with their own in-out votes. Do you think British voters should be punished now to make an example of them so others don't follow suit?
Silly questions. Obviously not.
So you're going to make
it's democracy at work. We're not punishing anyone. Sorry?
We'll get a nice deal then.
Well, if you want to leave, you leave. And then you start talking about how your future relationship will be shaped.
Aren't you worried about contagion if other people think you get a nice deal when you leave?
No, I think everybody looking to the markets, to the turbulences around the currency, to the downgrading of the rating agency, the United Kingdom downgrade by Standard & Poor's. This was unthinkable 6-7 days ago.
This morning at the European Parliament emergency debate on Brexit, the man whose surge in support terrified David Cameron into having a referendum led the applause when Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker acknowledged Britain's vote was final.
Democracy is democracy, and we must respect it. We must respect British democracy and the way it has voiced its view.
That's the last time you are applauding here.
He asked why Nigel Farage was still in Brussels. You might have guessed, to gloat.
Isn't it funny? You know, when I came here 17 years ago, and I said that I wanted to lead a campaign to get Britain to leave the European Union, you all laughed at me. Well, I have to say, you're not laughing now, are you? And the reason you're so upset, the reason you're so angry, has been perfectly clear from all the angry exchanges this morning. You, as a political project, are in denial.
The leader of France's Front National, Marine Le Pen, said she rejoiced at Britain's vote. It was a slap in the face for Europe. The SNP said Europe must give Scotland a way back in.
But please remember this. Scotland did not let you down. Please, I beg you, chers collègues, do not let Scotland down now.
Nigel Farage thinks some are already plotting to dilute the sort of break he wants from Europe. Exit talks will be a protracted series of trade-offs. Anything but straightforward.
If we can escape, we will.
Well, Gary Gibbon joins me now. Gary, the last time we stood in this room, in this hall, was in February when David Cameron hailed his deal that was going to save Britain's membership in the EU. That really does seem like ancient history now. But tell us, what was going on here today?
Another piece of ancient history was December, when we were here a bit before that, and he sat in front of the European Council members. They were all nervous about how the referendum was going to go, and he said, "Don't worry, I'm a winner." Some of them remember that very dearly. What is going on here is obviously in many ways momentous, in other ways not much, because David Cameron, as we've said before, is a zombie prime minister. He does, that's a phrase of one of his own cabinet ministers, by the way. He doesn't have a mandate from the British people to negotiate what comes next. There is this power void, and he's here slightly going through the motions of being still a sort of member of the European Union, and giving a report back to the European Union about why he thinks he lost the referendum.
But no notification of
No notification. I'm not sure the report back will go down particularly well, because he'll be telling them this problem you've got with freedom of movement won't go away until you deal with it, and there's very little appetite in there to do anything of that kind.
So amidst all the sound and fury that we heard today on the doorstep just behind us, was there any inkling at all of what any deal might actually look like?
Well, you get a bigger picture talking to Conservative candidates for the leadership and their teams, people around government, about what they think is the outline of a plausible shape of a deal, and it tends to be you try and get as much access to the single market as you possibly can, trading it a bit for some restriction on freedom of movement. And the thing is, all this sounds perfectly plausible to some people, actually not plausible to Nigel Farage, who wants a lot more on freedom of movement, but in here, still, there is no movement on freedom of movement. There was talk during our referendum in Berlin and other capitals about how perhaps over time they might have to rethink moving back from freedom of peoples to move to freedom of labour, maybe rethinking things, but they seem to be moving at an incredibly glacial pace, and there's every sign that it will not move fast enough for the deal that a lot of people in Britain, I think, would quite like to see.
And tomorrow they'll be talking behind David Cameron's back because he won't be invited.
There'll be many more of those meetings, 27, one not there.
Gary, thank you very much indeed. Well, of course, here in Brussels, access to the single market comes with a big condition, the free movement of people, as Gary just said. And any hopes that the UK can have one without the other have been dashed by the German Chancellor today. For Britain, she says, there will be no special favours. We started our day in Berlin, and so did Angela Merkel. She was inside the Reichstag, where the inscription reads, Dem deutschen Volke, to the German people. And that's who she was addressing directly today in a speech lathered with reassurances that Britain would not be getting any favourable treatment.
This means, first of all, that we cannot let one state jeopardise all the achievements of the European Union forged by the other 27. We will ensure that negotiations will not permit any British cherry-picking.
Every leader came to Brussels today packing at least some of their own national interest. Some were also more motivated than others by self-preservation. President Hollande wants to usher Britain out of the door as fast as possible.
Europe has made its voice heard. Now the United Kingdom must issue a notification to leave the European Union so we can organise things calmly, in the interest of the United Kingdom, but above all, in the interest of Europe. And I'm confident that there is no time to waste, because all eyes are on us. We are here, not just Europeans, the international press have their eyes on us. We have to take our responsibilities. It is strong enough to act, and to act in its own interest.
The political leaders weren't the only visitors in town. We came across Caroline McCall, the CEO of EasyJet, the airline that arguably has most to gain and most to lose from Europe. Your airline embodies the entity of Europe in terms of transport, being able to fly, open skies, being able to fly from, I don't know, Riga to Berlin or
anywhere.
Anywhere. Exactly.
Anywhere.
So what
Primary
happens
cities,
to that
cities.
now?
I think that remains. To be absolutely honest with you, nothing has fundamentally changed. So we are still in the EU, that's number one. Nothing changes for quite a long time, actually. Secondly, we will always be able to do that because if we can't stay in the single EU market for aviation, which I think all airlines in Europe want to stay in, then we will have an EU AOC, which is an entity in the EU, which would give us those flying rights.
But would you move your headquarters to, I don't know, to Dublin or to Frankfurt?
That remains to be seen.
But you're thinking of all those scenarios.
We have to think of all the scenarios.
You represent one of the most high-profile and successful British businesses.
Mm-hmm.
What is your message to the politicians who are currently AWOL in London?
Well, I mean, my message would be we need to see some certainty and some clarity very quickly, because actually we need that for Britain. You know, we need that stability, because that will bring about economic stability. It will make people feel an awful lot better. It will make people feel much more confident.
When will you get that certainty?
Well, I don't know. You know, we have to wait and see.
Off to the flea market in a grungier part of Brussels, a place brimming with bargain memories. The politicians may be venting over Brexit, but here I found mainly bereavement and anxiety.
The whole continent is finished.
The whole continent is finished?
Yes,
Why do you say that?
Because Brexit.
Maybe once Britain does it, maybe others will follow. It's the first sort of step in who knows what the future will be.
Isn't it?
It's tragic, I feel, yes.
Ismail from Cameroon is a Belgian citizen who told me that he was afraid that Brexit had opened the door to more xenophobia and more racism. Everyone is in uncharted territory. The old certainties have been discarded like unwanted suitcases, and the next few weeks and months will decide just who this dismembered mannequin represents. Well, to reflect on what we've seen and indeed heard today in Brussels and the United Kingdom is the leader of UKIP, Nigel Farage. So you told the members of the European Parliament that you had the last laugh, they're not laughing now, and that they'd never done a decent day's work in their life. These are the people that have to sign off on any kind of deal that the British government manages to cobble together with them. And that was ridiculous what you did, wasn't
Well, let's get a sense of perspective, shall we? I stood up to speak. I was, before I'd uttered a word, shouted down twice in my speech. The President of the Parliament had to halt proceedings and say, please listen to him.
But this is about the national interest. Why are you shouting, why are you dealing with people like that who need to sign off on a deal that is essential for our nation?
As I say, let's get a sense of perspectives. They were rude, abusive, shouted me down, and I teased them back a little bit.
So you were rude back to them?
No,
but unfortunately, we need those people to sign off on a deal.
I wasn't rude, I teased them. But I was trying to make a very serious point, and here it is. We are now going into a renegotiation. The argument I put to them was, let's be grown up and sensible about it. Let's recognise that in terms of trade, if there was a tariff barrier war between us, it would hurt them more than us.
What is grown up about telling people they've never done a decent day's work in their life when you need those people politically later down the road?
Well, when you try and make an argument in reasonable terms, as I've just done to you, and all they do is barrack and scream abuse, perhaps sometimes you come back with a little retort. But I do repeat the point. There are hundreds of thousands of German car workers' jobs utterly reliant on selling product into the United Kingdom. So let's have this conversation.
But were you acting in the national interest when you stood up and said those things? Because
I've been told.
The feeling in the chamber was very much against
I've been told I've been acting against the national interest for the last 20 years by even daring to suggest we should not be members of the European Union. We've had a referendum, we've voted to leave, it's now about having sensible terms of divorce.
Okay, let's talk about something that's happening, something alarming that's happening in the UK. The instances of racial abuse, of people who think that the Brexit vote somehow gives them the license to be abusive to other Europeans, to people outside the European Union, mentioning the P word again after God knows how many years. Will you condemn that?
Utterly, as I always have done. I mean, look, UKIP has always been a party that respects the rule of law and that is completely against extremism or discrimination, of course. And you know something? I will say this to you, that the abuse since that Brexit result is going both ways, because there are people who voted to leave who are being called horrible things. We're in a country of heightened tensions.
But people think, some people think, that they have been given a license to indulge in racial abuse because of the vote.
I think those people behaved like that before and would have behaved like that regardless of what the result is. And I condemn appalling behaviour on both sides of any argument.
But the instances of that abuse have gone up dramatically, according to the police.
Well, perhaps they have, perhaps they haven't. I don't know.
So what will you say to those people? To those people watching you right now, what will you say to them?
Behave yourselves. You know, we are living in the 21st century. We're living in a global world. We're living in a country that has, for 60 years, had people from the Commonwealth and elsewhere come to settle within it. And we will go on being a country that is open and welcoming. The difference is, having voted for Brexit, we can now control the numbers.
Jean-Claude Juncker said you should quit the European Parliament, hand back your expenses. Are you going to do that?
Well, do you know what? We've won the war in winning this referendum. We now have to win the peace. And the whole negotiation that will take place here and be debated and voted on in the European Parliament is something that I, as leader of the biggest British group in the European Parliament, have to take part in.
There are reports tonight, quite credible reports, that there might be a deal, if Boris Johnson becomes Prime Minister, that his Foreign Secretary will be George Osborne. Michael Gove at number 11. Do you feel that you're being cut out of a deal that you helped to create?
Well, I don't care about me being personally cut out of a deal. Let me tell you what I do care about. 17.5 million people, the largest number who've ever voted for anything in the United Kingdom, voted to get our country back and get our borders back. And what matters to me is that the government holds faith with those voters.
But you're not even sitting at the table.
Well, I'm not part of the government, but that doesn't matter. What matters is they do what people want and they don't backslide when it comes to the free movement of people.
Nigel Farage, thank you very much.
I've been getting